I had to start with this. I had to start with this. I was thinking like, how do we start the 2026-2027 season? And I had a lot of ideas, but for me, I just got to talk on what's on the top of my head. What am I feeling the most right now? And so far, it's this anti PSG rhetoric, right? And I just feel like it's too strong, and I think a lot of it is just kind of phony, right? And let's look back at this. Well, before we get into it, just real quick, make sure you like and subscribe. You guys know what we're here for. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We're on the road to 3K. But let me say it like this. For basically since QSI came in, since the Qataris bought PSG in 2011, there was this weird dislike of PSG, right? Or maybe at first it was a little bit of a like because it was, this new fresh face in European football, this new fresh power in European football. And then, maybe 2016, 2017, when we bought Neymar and we bought, well, actually, when we lost to Barcelona, I think that was kind of really when it started to pick up, right? Where this anti PSG rhetoric, oh, they just buy, but they never know what to do. They always choke. And then we lose to Barcelona. And, then we buy Neymar the year after, we buy Mbappe. All of a sudden it's this massive wave of hate, like, these guys they just buy, they don't know what they're doing. And then we get knocked out by Madrid and United, and we lose in the final to Bayern, and then we get Messi and still fail and fail, and a lot of people just laugh at us, and they're like, man, this team, they just buy, they're just stupid. Okay, so let's say we were stupid. Boom, we finally get smart. We buy a great coach, and I mean, we bought great coaches before, of course, but we buy a great coach, a great sporting director. We buy into this philosophy of, okay, we want a team that is deep AF, that has two, actual viable options per position, and we want to, buy French players, young players, guys who will run for the team, less egos. The team is the star, this type of stuff, right? We're going to leave Mbappe, Messi, Neymar behind. We're going to leave the superstars behind. We're going to create our own superstars. We're going to buy great technical players on the ball, this, that, and the third, right? We get it at this point, but we do this philosophy and it bears its fruits pretty fast, right? Extremely fast, you could even say, considering how sharp of a shift it was. And yes, it still costs a lot of money, but we were a lot smarter with our money, right? And a lot smarter, especially with the wages. So we take all that into account. We go towards this shift, and all of a sudden, PSG become likable, right? I mean, Luis Enrique has a great story. You talk about Dembele rebounding, bringing Kvaratskhelia, bringing him up from Napoli, and really catapulting him to superstar status. Young players like Doué and Zaire Emery coming through. You know what I'm saying? Nuno Mendes becoming the best left back we've ever seen since Maldini or Marcelo. You know, we get all of these things, and now it seems like we've almost exceeded expectations so much that people are beginning to hate us. And I'll start with this point of anti PSG rhetoric, where it's, okay, these guys rest. These guys are part-time footballers. That's their favorite phase, guys. Their favorite phrase, part-time footballers. But then you go and turn around and you see these same people begging their clubs to follow our footsteps, to say, hey, but I'm talking about Barca fans in particular too, but there's a lot of fans, right, who are doing it, right? Barca fans who are saying, okay, we're going to bring in Adeyemi, we're going to bring in Anthony Gordon. That way Yamal and Rafinha can rest in the league, right? We're going to bring in Rodri. That way we can rest Pedri sometimes. That way when De Jong's fit, he can come in and we can rest Rodri, and we can, bring in a lot of players who can rotate the squad, and these guys don't have to play all the league games. And then you can say the same thing about Arsenal, right? Who already followed in her footsteps, right? I don't even know. I saw Arteta complaining about the minutes played and stuff, but again, Arteta, you bought Zubamendi, you bought Havertz, you bought in all these guys to play in midfield, to play all across your team, right? You have a deep squad. You brought in Madueke, you brought in all these guys, Mascara, etc. Use them. You know what I'm saying? So not only are these guys complaining, but then they're going to turn around and then do it for their own team, right? So I don't think people actually care that PSG are rotating a lot or part-time footballers. They just care that their team wasn't doing it first. They're jealous. They're jealous because you look at the bench that PSG has had over the last few seasons. King and Lee, who goes to Atletico, on his first game gets them 3 points. Gonzalo Ramos balling out for Milan. You know what I'm saying? The actual quality on this bench. Bradley Barcola is about to go for 120 million euros at least to Liverpool, and Liverpool fans are looking at him like some sort of savior, and they're salivating over Ibrahim Mbaye, who didn't even get that much game time with us. And they're gonna pay what, 50 million euros for him or something. So You know what I'm saying? Look at the actual quality on the bench, the depth on the bench, the amount of great players on our bench. Yes, we can afford to rotate. People are going to start saying this is a league on thing because, you can only do this in league on. No, I think you could do this in a lot of leagues, actually. I really do. I think of back to City when City were four-peating. You think it was, Mahrez, Grealish, and Jesus or whoever the front three was, if it was Holland, whoever they were rotating, right? It wasn't always, Grealish, Holland, Mahrez. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it was Bernardo Silva, sometimes it was Sterling and Sane way back and Aguero, and they would switch, right? They'd bring in Jesus sometimes. They'd bring in a lot of rotation, right? Those guys weren't playing every single game. And I'm not saying that was as extreme as PSG, right? Because, that was back when it was only three subs. It's different. But I do think that this idea that, PSG is a part-time footballing club, it's just phony. I think it's just jealousy. Because quite frankly, we are living in a football era where there are so many games, so many competitions. They're coming up with new competitions, finding new ways to add games, whether it's international or at club level, that you need a deep squad. You need two different teams, basically. You need at least 16 viable players, and PSG for the last 2 years have had 20. So, a lot of people are I think it's just jealousy. I don't think you can say, oh, PSG, we have to start discrediting, we have to start taxing their Champions Leagues. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Because quite frankly, it's actually a turn of opinion, right? We talk about the history of PSG's perception. People hated PSG, and a lot of the hate from PSG and a lot of the analysis behind PSG choking in Champions Leagues years prior was, oh, they play in Ligue 1. You can't go and play, Angers on a Saturday and then expect to be ready to face United on a Wednesday. You can't go and play Montpellier on Saturday and come up Wednesday versus Real Madrid. You know what I'm saying? And that was ridiculous to me, right? It never was the league. You know what I'm saying? But now, all of a sudden, we get players who are so good. All of a sudden, now the league's an advantage. No, and you guys aren't watching the league anyway. Don't even get me started on that. You guys seem to only care about League On when it fits your agenda. You guys aren't sitting down and watching Lille versus Monaco. Great games, by the way. That's a great game. You're not watching Lyon versus Toulouse. Great games, but you're not watching it, right? Don't act like you care. You only care because your team is starting to lose to PSG, and that's what it is. And I get it. When a team starts beating you, you try to find excuses, right? Barca and Madrid fans will always blame the referee. English fans will blame anything genuinely, whether it's VAR, whether that we get away with that in the Premier League though. They play rugby over there, but I digress. Like I look at this and I think a lot of this is just quite frankly excuses. It's excuses. Because this PSG team, you look at the way we play, the fluidity, the pressing, regardless of what happens this season, the last two seasons, this has been the team of the decade, the generational team, right? A lot of people are trying to discount it, and maybe because you haven't been able to see them week in and week out. That's a different story, right? Okay, French football isn't as popular, sure. But you cannot discount the quality of what we saw on the pitch, right? This team almost went invincible in Ligue 1. I feel like people forget that because we've been so successful, right? Back-to-back UCLs, you know what I'm saying? Trebles and sextuples and, 11 trophies or so over the last 2 years. You can get lost in all of this success that you don't realize the actual achievements of this team. And I forgive you. But quite frankly, this whole PSG hate has to stop with this part-time footballing scam because it's not part-time footballing. It's called building a good squad. I go and look at the teams in the Premier League who have spent far more money than PSG. I'm looking at Chelsea. I'm looking at Manchester United. I'm looking at, even Arsenal have spent more money. I look at that and I say, you guys can't build a deep squad, especially Chelsea, who have, three squads worth of players, and they're finishing 10th in the league. And I don't want to hear about, oh, the Premier League is just so hard. Bro, you're the richest team on the continent. No, duh. You have to be able to, you know what I'm saying? You have to be able to deal with that. You know what I mean? I think if PSG were, a lot of people ask, oh, if PSG were in the Premier League, they wouldn't survive. That's just false. Bro, you give PSG Premier League money, PSG already make a lot of money. You give PSG Premier League money, you give the top players in England a chance to go live in Paris and you can still play in the Premier League. Brother, oh my gosh. So the amount of things we do to that league, you thought City was bad? Oh my days. Oh my days. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. Okay, because I think that people look at that, they say PSG wouldn't survive in the Premier League, Bayern wouldn't survive in the Premier League. You give those teams Premier League money, the way these Premier League teams spend and spend and spend, my goodness, the TV revenue, it's night and day. It's night and day the revenue from TV rights that Premier League teams receive versus the rest of the teams in Europe. And yeah, I get it. The Premier League is a very strongly marketed product, and there's deeper conversations we can go about that. But I really do believe that a lot of teams are just trying to discredit, the achievements of a PSG or even a Bayern because, quite frankly, it's jealousy. It's jealousy. There's no real, you know what I'm saying? There's no real analysis other than the fact, oh, these guys played less minutes. In 24-25, the PSG team played a lot of minutes. They played the, regular amount of minutes that a team plays. But, then you have the Club World Cup right after that. And then you have to go right into the season again. I mean, obviously you have to rotate. How else are we going to get it done? You know what I'm saying? There's this idea, I think that, or this principle, I think that we're kind of holding on to where people have to suffer for their success, right? Like teams have to suffer for their success. Oh, well, you have to really struggle because, when you make it to Europe and you fight in Europe, and then you also have to deal with the league, that has to be a struggle. Brother, we are talking about teams who can spend £500,000 on a whim. They should be able, and they are able, and have the resources to deal with a league season and a Champions League season. And then people will also bring up the postponements too. And you know what? To be fair, I think there's a stronger point with the postponements than it is with the rotations. However, even with the postponements throughout history, not only for PSG, we've seen it with Rennes, we've seen it with Lyon, we've seen it with Marseille. French teams get their games postponed. It's what the French teams do. And I am of the belief that the Champions League is also a competition between associations, right? An association wants to say, hey, we have the Champions League winner in our league. You know what I'm saying? It means something to have that in your league. And then you compound that with the fact that Ligue 1, financially speaking, of all the top 5 leagues, it's the weakest, right? And so many teams live off of a Champions League qualification, right? Especially if you're in that 4th place or that 3rd place, you're living off of that Champions League qualification. That's a free 50 million euros to your budget the next season. That's huge for French teams. So to keep that Champions League, qualification spot, to keep 4 spots for the UCL in the league, well, you need the highest coefficient. How do you get the highest coefficient? To ensure that a French team goes as far as possible in the UCL or in their European tournament. And you saw with Strasbourg last year too, right? They got their game postponed. So I get it. I do understand it's tough for the team who were going to play that game, right? The other team who's going to play that game to get their game postponed. But I do think it's for the betterment of the league. And, we'll see at the end of this season how important that becomes because the coefficients right now are pretty close. And, you look at the teams that Portugal and the Netherlands are sending to Europe, and especially Portugal, where I think Benfica will be a strong, strong candidate to win the Europa League. That'll be huge for them to push for that top 5 spot. France needs the highest, performances of Europe possible. So that way they continue to rely on that UCL qualification, on that UCL money. The last thing I want to touch on is this Dembele news. So this Dembele news, he's saying, hey, I'm going to get some rest for the next few days. The coach says, yeah. Sporting direction says, yeah, I'm going to rest and I'll come back to training on Monday. And now I'm seeing a lot of people say, man, all these PSG players, they can't even play every 3 days. Dembele can't play every 3 days, this, that, and the third. And I just feel like people are so hypocritical because I feel like last year or 2 years ago, we all were in agreement that there are way too many games, right? You look at Dembele's last 3-4 years of football, right? He plays the 2023-24 season with PSG, goes to the Euro, plays the entire Euro, and then plays 24-25 with PSG again, and then Club World Cup. There's basically no rest between the Club World Cup and the UEFA Super Cup, and then he has to play the whole season again. And obviously he was very injury prone last season, so he had to deal with that. And now he has to play the World Cup, and then he comes back early again to play the Super Cup and play the French Super Cup as well. So you take all of that into account. For a player that we know is already injury prone, why are we surprised or why are we even hating that he's taking rest? I mean, if you look at Dembele in those first 2 games, you could tell he's not fit. He came back to try and help the team, to try and win. But can you help the team if you're not fit, if you're not at your best? And again, I point back to PSG squad building. People would be like, "Oh man, you can only do this in Ligue 1." No, I don't. I think if he was in La Liga, he could do this. I think if he was in the Premier League, he could also do this, right? Like I think the Premier League equivalent of Lille is what, like Chelsea, and we all know what we did to Chelsea, man. So you know what I'm saying? Like it's sorry, I hate to see it, but you get what I mean? Like Lille is a big league on team, yes. But Lille at the same time is not the biggest league on team. Right now the biggest challengers to PSG is going to be Lens, and then Marseille and Lyon, and then you say Lille. But let's get back to the point, right? Dembele has basically played 3 straight seasons, 3 straight summers, right, with no rest in between, and he comes back early this season after an injury-prone season with PSG anyway to try and win the Super Cup. And now he's not performing at his best. Coach doesn't think he's fit. Dembele doesn't look fit. Yes, go take some time off, come back refreshed, and then let's start working on your fitness. You know what I mean? I don't see why this is being viewed as such a big deal as, part-time football or this, that, and the third. Because at the end of the day, we all agreed that there's too many games. And now you're starting to see the results of this, right? You're seeing players get injured more often. You're seeing players having to be managed better. Right. And people are mad that PSG just did it first. I don't think people are mad that PSG actually did it. They're just mad they did it first, because I'll see people go and call PSG part-time footballers, and then you're begging Deco and Laporta to say, hey, go buy Adeyemi, go buy Gordon, go buy these players, so that way we can rest so we can rest Yamal and them in the league, right? So overall, I think this is getting blown out of proportion. I think the PSG resting thing is getting blown out of proportion. I think these are all excuses for people to discredit what greatness is doing in front of them. The absolute sheer levels of success that PSG is achieving. Because for so long, people hated PSG. People are not used to seeing PSG succeed, right? They're not used to it. And people fear new things. This is just, human fact, right? The human behavior. So I say this to say, Dembele taking rest is nothing more than a player knowing when he needs to rest, and it's totally okay because we're overplaying players anyway. But also, I think PSG should be applauded for their squad building and not be, discredited or taken apart simply because they built a great squad, being a rich club. That's what rich clubs should do, right? Being smart with their money. Anywho, this is In Defense of PSG. You guys let me know what you think. Until next time, it's been your boy, Ollie Footy. I'm glad to be back, man. More content on the way. We out.